A gilded cage is still a prison, especially when it holds your darkest secret. Welcome to the opulent, terrifying world of Luca Moretti, a ruthless syndicate leader who thought he had his entire empire under control. He brought his glamorous new fiancée home to his fortified estate expecting absolute compliance. Instead, he found his deeply traumatized hidden toddler clinging to the one person he was supposed to ignore, a completely innocent, financially desperate nanny named Chloe. What happens when absolute power collides with pure innocence? Listen closely. Chloe Davis clutched the straps of her worn canvas tote bag, her knuckles turning white as the black SUV wound its way up the treacherous winding driveway of the Moretti estate. She was a 23-year-old nursing student drowning in medical debt. Her younger sister Lily required experimental treatments for a rare autoimmune disease, and the bills had long ago eclipsed Chloe's meager salary at the local clinic. Desperation had driven her to accept this peculiar assignment. The recommendation had come from Dr. Harrison Gray, a discreet physician who often treated patients who preferred not to answer questions in emergency rooms. He had promised her a salary that would clear Lily's debts in 6 months. The only catch she had, to sign a stack of non-disclosure agreements, thicker than a phone book, and surrender her cell phone at the gates. Stepping out of the vehicle, Chloe was immediately dwarfed by the sheer scale of the compound. It was less a home, and more a modern fortress built of cold grey stone and reinforced glass nestled deep within a private, heavily wooded peninsula in upstate New York. Armed men in tailored suits stood at the perimeter, their eyes scanning the tree line with practiced paranoia. Giovanni, an older man with a silver mustache and a limp that spoke of past violence, escorted her inside. "Mr. Moretti demands absolute discretion, Miss Davis." Giovanni rumbled his voice like grinding gravel. "You are here for the boy. You do not ask questions about the guests, you do not wander the East Wing, and you do not speak to the press. Understood?" "Understood," Chloe whispered, her voice barely carrying over the echo of her cheap shoes on the imported marble floors. She was led to a nursery on the 3rd floor. The room was breathtakingly beautiful, filled with expensive educational toys, a hand-painted mural of the Tuscan countryside, and a massive mahogany crib. In the center of the room sat a little boy. This was Leo. Leo was 3 years old with a mop of dark curly hair and eyes so deeply brown they looked like obsidian. He was clutching a ragged, faded blue stuffed bear, the only item in the room that looked remotely loved. He didn't look up when Chloe entered. He didn't blink. He just stared blankly at the wall. Dr. Gray had warned her Leo's mother had died under highly classified circumstances 6 months ago. Since that night, the boy hadn't uttered a single syllable. He barely ate, rarely slept, and shrank from physical contact. Chloe sank to her knees, making herself smaller so she wouldn't intimidate him. She didn't force a cheerful greeting. Instead, she sat a few feet away, pulled a simple pop-up book from her tote, and softly began to read aloud to the empty air, her voice a gentle melodic hum. For an hour, Leo ignored her, but eventually his tiny fingers twitched, and he shifted his weight, leaning just a fraction of an inch toward the sound of her soothing voice. It was a start. 2 weeks passed in a blur of quiet routine. Chloe poured all her maternal instincts into the broken little boy. She learned to communicate with him through glances and soft gestures. She discovered he hated the texture of pureed food, but would eat thinly sliced apples if she arranged them like a star. She learned that thunderstorms sent him into silent, hyperventilating panic attacks, which could only be quelled if she wrapped him tightly in a heavy blanket and rocked him in the corner of his closet. Then the fragile peace shattered. It was a Tuesday evening when the master of the house finally returned. Luca Moretti was a terrifyingly handsome man, tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp, aristocratic features and eyes that held the chilling coldness of a winter storm. He carried an aura of absolute authority that made the air in the room feel instantly thinner. But he didn't arrive alone. Hanging off his arm was Vanessa Carmichael, the daughter of a corrupt shipping magnate whose empire perfectly aligned with Luca's logistical needs. Vanessa was undeniably stunning, with sleek blonde hair, razor-sharp cheekbones, and a smile that never quite reached her calculating green eyes. She wore a silk emerald dress that cost more than Chloe's college tuition. "So this is the famous fortress," Vanessa purred, stepping into the grand foyer and trailing a manicured hand over a priceless antique vase. "A bit gloomy, darling. We'll need to redecorate." Luca's expression remained unreadable. "My men will take your bags to the master suite." Vanessa's gaze then drifted up the sweeping staircase, catching sight of Chloe, who was standing on the landing with Leo tucked behind her legs. Vanessa's perfect lips curled into a sneer of undisguised distaste. "And who is this?" Vanessa asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "The help, that is Chloe," Luca said, his deep voice carrying easily across the vast space. "She is Leo's nanny," Vanessa scoffed, eyeing the little boy, who was now trembling behind Chloe's skirt. "Right." The child. Honestly, Luca keeping a traumatized kid in the house is just bad energy. Wouldn't he be better off in a specialized facility? Switzerland has some lovely boarding schools. Chloe felt a spike of hot anger pierce through her usual timidity. She instinctively placed a protective hand on Leo's head. Luca's eyes darted to Chloe, catching the fiery defiance in her posture. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face before he turned back to his fiancée. "Leo stays here, Vanessa. That is non-negotiable." Vanessa pouted, tracing the lapel of his jacket. "Whatever you say, darling, but keep him out of my way. I don't do well with sticky fingers and tantrums." As Vanessa sashayed up the stairs purposefully, bumping her shoulder against Chloe as she passed, Chloe looked down at Leo. The boy's tiny hands were clutching the fabric of her skirt in a white-knuckled death grip. In that moment, Chloe knew she wasn't just here to pay her sister's medical bills anymore. She was here to protect this child from the vipers slithering through the halls of this gilded cage. Life at the estate quickly devolved into a psychological battlefield. Vanessa treated the mansion as her personal kingdom, barking orders at the seasoned staff and demanding immediate compliance. She hosted lavish impromptu cocktail parties for her high society friends, filling the quiet sanctuary with booming music and shrill laughter. For Leo, the noise was agonizing. The sudden influx of strangers and the loud, unpredictable sounds echoed the trauma he had locked away in his mind. He began regressing, refusing to eat the apple stars Chloe made for him, and spending hours hiding under his bed. Chloe found herself increasingly in the crosshairs of Vanessa's cruelty. Vanessa would casually drop her expensive coats on the floor for Chloe to pick up, or loudly complain about the smell of cheap perfume whenever the nanny walked by. Chloe swallowed her pride, biting her tongue so hard she tasted blood, all for the sake of the little boy who needed her. One evening, Luca hosted a highly sensitive dinner with several influential business associates men with thick necks, custom suits, and dangerous reputations. Among them was Victor Carmichael, Vanessa's father, a man whose smile resembled a shark zeroing in on a bleeding fish. The alliance between the Moretti and Carmichael families was meant to secure the eastern seaboard's underground shipping ports. It was a billion-dollar merger, sealed with an engagement ring. Upstairs, a severe thunderstorm had rolled in off the coast. Thunder rattled the reinforced glass of the nursery windows. Leo was inconsolable. He wasn't just crying. He was thrashing his small face red and contorted in a silent scream of pure terror. Chloe abandoned all protocol, She wrapped him in his weighted blanket, but it wasn't enough. Desperate, she picked him up, holding his trembling body tightly against her chest, and began pacing the long, dimly lit hallway of the 3rd floor, singing a soft folk lullaby her own mother used to sing. "Hush now, the storm is just the sky clearing its throat," she murmured over and over, pressing her lips to his forehead. Unbeknownst to Chloe, Luca had stepped out of the dining room to take a secure phone call. He walked to the base of the secondary staircase to find a quiet corner. He froze when he heard the faint, melodic sound of singing drifting down from above. Silently, the Mafia boss ascended the stairs. He stood in the shadows of the landing watching. He saw Chloe dressed in a simple, faded cotton dress, her hair escaping its messy bun. She was rocking his son with a fierce, unconditional tenderness that made an unfamiliar tightness grip Luca's chest. For months, Luca had felt nothing but a hollow, crushing guilt regarding his son. He had built an empire of blood and fear, yet he couldn't protect his own child from the horrors of his world. He had hired doctors, specialists, and therapists, all of whom had treated Leo like a broken toy. But Chloe didn't look at Leo like he was broken. She looked at him like he was precious. As Luca watched, a massive crack of thunder shook the house. Leo flinched violently, but Chloe held him tighter, burying her face in his curls. Slowly, incredibly, the boy's thrashing subsided. He buried his face into the crook of Chloe's neck, and for the first time in 6 months, his breathing evened out. He was asleep. Luca remained frozen in the shadows, struck by the profound intimacy of the scene. It was a stark, jarring contrast to the woman sitting downstairs at his dining table, a woman who spent 3 hours agonizing over floral arrangements, but couldn't be bothered to learn his son's middle name. "She has a way with him," a voice murmured behind Luca. Luca didn't flinch. He glanced over his shoulder at Giovanni, who had silently come up behind him. "She is capable," Luca replied coldly, masking the tempest of emotions swirling inside him. "She is more than capable, boss," Giovanni noted quietly. "She cares. Something this house has lacked for a long time." Before Luca could respond, the sharp, clipping sound of stiletto heels echoed up the stairs. Vanessa appeared holding a crystal flute of champagne, her face flushed with alcohol and irritation. "Luca, there you are. My father is asking about the shipment schedules for the docks. You can't just abandon your own engagement dinner." She whined, grabbing his arm. Her loud voice caused Leo to stir and whimper in Chloe's arms down the hall. Chloe shot a desperate protective glare over her shoulder, her eyes locking with Luca's for a split second. In the dim light, Luca saw the fierce maternal fire in the young Nanny's eyes. It was a look that dared anyone to harm the child in her arms. "Keep your voice down, Vanessa." Luca snapped his tone dangerously low. The sudden ice in his voice made Vanessa blink in shock. "Excuse me," she bristled. "My son is sleeping. Go back downstairs. I will be down in a moment." Vanessa's eyes narrowed into slits as she looked past Luca, spotting Chloe at the end of the hall. A toxic mix of jealousy and realization dawned on her features. She saw the way Luca had been looking at the nanny. It wasn't the look of an employer assessing a worker. It was something far more dangerous. "Fine," Vanessa hissed, turning sharply on her heel. "But don't take too long. You have a business to run, darling. Don't let the help distract you." As she marched downstairs, a new sinister plan began to form in Vanessa's mind. Chloe Davis was no longer just an annoyance. She was a threat, and in Vanessa's world, threats were brutally, systematically eliminated. 2 days later, the atmosphere in the estate was thick enough to cut with a knife. Vanessa had changed her tactics. Instead of outright hostility toward Chloe, she began playing the role of the benevolent mistress of the house, though her smiles were laced with arsenic. She forced Chloe to take her breaks in the staff kitchen instead of the nursery, isolating Leo during the afternoons. Chloe felt a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She knew Vanessa was plotting something. She needed this job desperately. Lily's next round of treatments was due in 3 weeks, but every instinct screamed at her to pack her bags and run. Only the thought of leaving little Leo in this snake pit kept her feet planted. The trap snapped shut on a Thursday afternoon. Chloe was in the laundry room, carefully folding Leo's tiny shirts, when a commotion erupted in the grand foyer. Heavy footsteps echoed on the marble, followed by Vanessa's shrill, dramatic voice. "I demand you search the premises immediately. It was my grandmother's vintage Cartier necklace. It's worth $500,000. Chloe froze, a cold sweat breaking out on her neck. She stepped out of the laundry room and hurried toward the foyer. Luca was standing at the base of the stairs looking murderous. Giovanni and 3 other security men were flanking him. Vanessa was pacing, wiping away crocodile tears with a lace handkerchief. "I left it on my vanity this morning," Vanessa sobbed, clinging to Luca's arm. "I know I did. And the only person who was up on the 2nd floor besides the cleaning staff, who have been with you for years, Luca was her." Vanessa pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at Chloe, who had just stepped into the entryway. The silence in the room was deafening. Every eye turned to the young nanny in her faded jeans and oversized sweater. "Me!" Chloe gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. I haven't been in the master wing all week. I've been with Leo." "Liar!" Vanessa spat, dropping the grieving act for a second of pure malice. "I saw you lingering near my door. You're just a desperate little girl with a mountain of medical debt. Oh yes, I had my father's people look into you. Your sister is sick, isn't she? Must be tempting seeing all this wealth lying around when your family is drowning in bills." Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. Her privacy had been violated. "That's a lie. I would never steal from you. I would never steal from anyone." Luca's face was an unreadable mask of carved stone. He stepped away from Vanessa and walked slowly toward Chloe. The sheer physical presence of the man made Chloe want to shrink backward, but she held her ground, lifting her chin. "Giovanni," Luca commanded quietly, never breaking eye contact with Chloe. "Search her room." "Mr. Moretti, please." Chloe pleaded, her voice cracking. "I swear to you on my sister's life, I didn't take it." "If you are innocent, you have nothing to fear," Luca replied, though there was a flicker of hesitation in his dark eyes. He didn't want to believe it. In the cutthroat world he inhabited, trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, yet something inside him vehemently rejected the idea that this warm, selfless girl was a thief. 10 agonizing minutes passed. Chloe stood trembling under the scrutinizing gaze of the armed guards and Vanessa's triumphant smirks. Finally, heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs. Giovanni descended, his face grave. In his large, scarred hand, a heavy diamond necklace glittered under the chandelier's light. "I found it, boss," Giovanni said softly. Vanessa let out a theatrical gasp. "I knew it. Where was it?" "Wrapped in a pair of socks at the bottom of Miss Davis's tote bag," Giovanni reported. He looked at Chloe with a mixture of disappointment and pity. "No!" Chloe cried out, stepping forward. "No, someone planted it there. I didn't put it there. Please, you have to believe me." "Save your breath, you little thief," Vanessa sneered, stepping up to Luca's side. "Luca, call the police. Or better yet, have your men take care of her. She breached your security. She betrayed your trust." Luca stared at the glittering diamonds in Giovanni's hand, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles ticked. The evidence was damning. His world operated on harsh, absolute rules. Betrayal was met with swift, merciless punishment. He looked at Chloe, seeing the tears spilling down her pale cheeks, the absolute devastation in her eyes. "Pack your things," Luca said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper. You have 10 minutes to leave my property. If I ever see you again, I will not be merciful. Mr. Moretti, please, Chloe sobbed, dropping to her knees. What about Leo? He needs me. Don't you dare mention my son. Luca snarled the mask, finally slipping to reveal the violent predator underneath. Get her out of here, Vanessa commanded the guards, a victorious smile stretching across her face. 2 guards stepped forward, grabbing Chloe roughly by the arms and hauling her to her feet. Chloe fought against them, sobbing hysterically, not because she was losing her job, but because she was being torn away from the little boy who had finally started to heal. Stop! The sound was small. It was a tiny, raspy voice, weak from months of disuse. But in the echoing expanse of the marble foyer, it sounded like a gunshot. Everyone froze. The guard stopped pulling Chloe. Vanessa's mouth dropped open. Luca whipped around, his eyes wide with shock. Standing at the top of the sweeping staircase, clutching his faded blue bear in one hand and the wooden banister in the other, was little Leo. His dark eyes, usually vacant and lost, were focused entirely on Vanessa. Stop! Leo rasped again, his voice cracking. He took a shaky step down the stairs. Bad lady put it there. I saw. The silence that followed was absolute. Luca felt the air leave his lungs. His son, his silent, broken son, had spoken. Leo slowly descended the stairs, his small, bare feet padding softly against the marble. He walked straight past his stunned father, past the furious, paling Vanessa, and marched right up to the guards holding Chloe. Let her go, the 3-year-old demanded, his brow furrowed, in a surprisingly fierce imitation of his father's terrifying scowl. The guards immediately dropped their hands, stepping back as if they had been burned. Leo grabbed Chloe's trembling hand with his tiny fingers, placing himself between the nanny and the rest of the room. Luca turned slowly toward his fiancée. The protective hesitation he had felt moments ago vanished, replaced by an arctic, lethal rage. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What did he just say? Vanessa? Luca asked, his voice so soft, so devoid of emotion, that Giovanni instinctively placed his hand on the weapon holstered beneath his jacket. Vanessa stumbled backward, her face ashen, the triumphant smirk utterly obliterated. Luca, darling, he's a traumatized child. He's hallucinating. He doesn't know what he's saying. I saw, Leo repeated, leaning his little head against Chloe's leg. Bad lady sneak into Chloe's room. Put shiny thing in a bag. Bad lady. Luca didn't shout. He didn't raise his hand. He simply closed the distance between himself and Vanessa in 3 long strides. He towered over her, the apex predator of the New York underworld, fully unleashed. You brought your petty, pathetic, high society games into my home, Luca whispered, his eyes locked onto hers with lethal intent. You framed the only person who has managed to help my son. You thought you could manipulate my family. Luca, please, we have an alliance. The ports, Vanessa stammered, tears of genuine terror now spilling down her face. The alliance is dead, Luca stated coldly. And if you are not off my property in 5 minutes, your father will be collecting you in a wooden box. Vanessa didn't need to be told twice. She turned and fled up the stairs, sobbing, her heels clicking frantically as she ran to pack her things. Luca stood in the foyer, running a shaking hand through his dark hair. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, leaving behind a profound, earth-shattering realization. He slowly turned around to look at the bottom of the stairs. Chloe had dropped to her knees again, wrapping her arms securely around Leo, burying her face in his neck as she cried tears of pure relief. Leo was awkwardly patting her back, holding his stuffed bear against her shoulder. They were a picture of survival, of a bond forged in the darkest of places. Luca walked over to them. He knelt down on the hard marble floor, putting himself at eye level with the young woman he had nearly destroyed and the son he had nearly given up on. "Chloe," Luca said softly, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in his brutal, calculated life, the Mafia boss didn't know what to say. But as Chloe looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant, and his son kept a protective grip on her shirt, Luca knew one thing for certain. The engagement was over, but the real war for his family's soul had just begun. Apologies do not come easily to men who build their empires on terror and absolute authority. For Luca Moretti, acknowledging fault was synonymous with showing weakness, a fatal flaw in the New York syndicate. Yet as he knelt on the cold marble of his foyer, looking at the tear-stained face of the young woman who had just shielded his son from destruction, the rules of his dark world temporarily dissolved. Chloe gently pushed herself off the floor, scooping Leo into her arms. The little boy buried his face in her neck, his small hands still clutching her sweater. He had exhausted his voice and his courage retreating back into his silent shell, but the profound shift in his demeanor was undeniable. He felt safe with her. "I am not asking for your forgiveness, Chloe," Luca said, rising to his full imposing height. His voice was gravelly, stripped of its usual commanding edge. "What happened here today was an unforgivable breach of my home, but I am asking you to stay. Name your price. Anything." Chloe held Leo tighter, her heart still racing. She looked around the cavernous hall at the heavily armed guards who had been ready to throw her to the wolves just moments ago. She was terrified of Luca, terrified of his world, but she looked down at Leo's dark curls. She couldn't leave him. "I don't want your money," Chloe said, her voice shaking, but her chin held high in defiance. "I want my sister Lily transferred to Memorial Sloan Kettering in Manhattan by tomorrow morning. I want her under the care of Dr. Aris Thorne. Wait, no, Dr. Aris Caldwell, the leading specialist in pediatric autoimmune disorders. I want a private room, round-the-clock security, and every single medical bill paid in full under a clean, untraceable shell corporation. If you can do that, I will stay for Leo." A flicker of genuine respect crossed Luca's face. She wasn't negotiating for jewels or a lavish salary. She was fighting for blood. It was a language the Mafia boss understood perfectly. "Consider it done." Luca agreed without a second of hesitation. He gestured to his head of security. "Giovanni, make the calls. Wake up the hospital board if you have to. Have an armored transport ready at Miss Davis's sister's current clinic within the hour." Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the fortified upstate estate shifted dramatically. With Vanessa and her toxic energy purged from the halls, the mansion felt less like a tomb and more like a sanctuary. Leo's progress skyrocketed. Having successfully broken his silence to defend Chloe, he began speaking in small, hesitant sentences, mostly to her, but occasionally asking his father for the salt at the dinner table. Every time the boy spoke, Luca looked at Chloe with a terrifyingly intense gratitude that made her breath catch in her throat. However, the peace inside the walls was a stark contrast to the escalating war outside. Breaking off an engagement with the Carmichael family was an act of war. Victor Carmichael, Vanessa's father, and a ruthless shipping magnate did not take the public humiliation lightly. He retaliated swiftly. 2 of Luca's primary distribution warehouses in Red Hook, Brooklyn, were firebombed in the middle of the night. Supply chains were severed, and tensions across the 5 boroughs reached a boiling point. Luca was increasingly absent, spending long nights in his secure basement office with his capos orchestrating counterstrikes. When he was present, he looked exhausted, the shadows under his dark eyes deepening. One evening, Chloe was in the library reading a medical textbook, while Leo napped on a plush velvet sofa nearby. The heavy oak doors creaked open, and Luca stepped inside. He had just returned from the city. His custom Italian suit was rumpled, his tie was discarded, and there was a faint, unmistakable scent of copper and gunpowder clinging to his clothes. He didn't speak. He just walked over to the liquor cabinet, poured 2 fingers of amber bourbon, and collapsed into an armchair opposite Chloe. He stared into the fireplace, looking more like a haunted ghost than a feared syndicate leader. Chloe watched him over the rim of her textbook. The rational part of her brain screamed to stay quiet, to remain the invisible help. But her nursing instincts, the innate desire to soothe pain, won out. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, Mr. Moretti," Chloe said softly, closing her book. Luca's dark eyes shifted to her. "The world is an ugly place, Chloe, and right now it is demanding a toll I am trying very hard not to pay in blood." He took a slow sip of his drink. "And please call me Luca. Formalities seem ridiculous after everything you've done for my family." "Luca, then," she murmured, testing the name on her tongue. It felt dangerous, intimate. "Is it Vanessa's father?" The news said there was an industrial accident at the docks. Luca let out a dark, humorless chuckle. "An industrial accident? Yes. Victor is throwing a temper tantrum. He wants to cripple my infrastructure to force me back to the negotiating table. He thinks I will trade my son's peace of mind for shipping routes." "Will you?" Chloe asked the question, slipping out before she could stop it. Luca's gaze snapped to hers, a sudden fierce fire igniting in his eyes. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, closing the physical distance between them. "I would burn this entire city to ash before I let that woman near my son again." Luca vowed, his voice a low, lethal purr. "And I would burn it twice over before I let anyone touch you." Chloe's heart did a strange, erratic flutter against her ribs. The intensity in his eyes wasn't just protective, it was possessive. He was a man who claimed what was his, and she was terrifyingly aware that she and Leo had become his anchors in a sea of chaos. Retaliation in the syndicate world is never a matter of if, but when. And Victor Carmichael was not a man who fought fair. A month after the broken engagement, a fragile routine had settled over the estate. Lily's treatment at Sloan Kettering was proceeding miraculously well. The cutting-edge immunotherapy, funded by Luca's deep pockets, had sent her autoimmune disease into remission. To celebrate, Luca had arranged a highly secured private visit for Chloe and Leo to see Lily at the hospital. The trip into Manhattan was a logistical nightmare. They traveled in a 3-car convoy of blacked-out, bulletproof SUVs. Giovanni drove the lead car, while Chloe, Leo, and Luca sat in the heavily armored center vehicle, flanked by 2 armed guards. The visit with Lily was everything Chloe had prayed for. Seeing her younger sister sitting up in bed, color in her cheeks, laughing as Leo showed her his beloved blue stuffed bear, brought tears to Chloe's eyes. For a few hours in that sterile hospital room, they weren't surrounded by the Mafia. They were just a family. Luca stood quietly in the corner, observing the scene with an unreadable expression, though a rare, genuine softness lingered around his mouth. The nightmare began on the journey back upstate. It was dusk, and a heavy autumn rain had begun to slick the pavement of the FDR drive. Chloe was in the back seat, tracing circles on a sleeping Leo's back. Luca was beside her, scrolling through a secure tablet. Suddenly, a massive commercial tow truck violently swerved across 3 lanes of traffic, slamming directly into the lead SUV. The sound of crunching metal and shattered glass was deafening. "Ambush!" The driver of their vehicle yelled instantly, slamming on the brakes and throwing the SUV into reverse. But they were boxed in. 2 black vans screeched to a halt behind them, blocking their retreat. The back doors of the vans flew open, revealing masked men armed with automatic rifles. "Get down!" Luca roared, throwing his massive body over Chloe and Leo, just as the first volley of bullets hit their vehicle. The reinforced glass spider-webbed under the barrage, holding firm for now, but the sheer kinetic force of the bullets rocked the heavy SUV. The deafening roar of gunfire filled the tight space. Leo woke up screaming, his hands flying to his ears. Chloe operated purely on adrenaline. She curled her body tightly around Leo, tucking his head against her chest, creating a human shield of her own flesh and bone. Luca drew a heavy customized Glock from his shoulder holster. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated violence. He wasn't the grieving father or the tired businessman now. He was the apex predator. He kicked open the heavy door, using it as a shield, and returned fire with terrifying mechanical precision. The gunfight outside was a chaotic blur of muzzle flashes in the rain. Giovanni and the surviving guards from the lead car were pinning down the attackers from the flank. "Chloe, when I say go, you take him and run to the tree line by the off-ramp," Luca shouted over the din, slamming a fresh magazine into his weapon. "Giovanni has a secondary extraction team waiting 1 mile north." "I'm not leaving you!" Chloe screamed back, clutching Leo. "Do as I say," Luca bellowed, firing 3 rapid shots that dropped an attacker, advancing on their right flank. Suddenly, the reinforced window on Chloe's side finally gave way with a sickening shatter. A masked man had flanked them, shoving the barrel of a rifle through the broken window, aiming directly at Luca's exposed back. Chloe didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, throwing her body over Luca's shoulder, just as the attacker pulled the trigger. A deafening crack echoed inside the car, followed immediately by a sharp, burning agony tearing through the back of Chloe's left shoulder. She gasped. The breath knocked from her lungs and slumped against the leather seats. Luca spun around, his eyes wide with horror as he saw the blood blooming on Chloe's sweater. He raised his weapon and fired a single devastating shot right between the attacker's eyes. The man slumped backward into the rain. "Chloe!" Luca roared, dropping his gun and catching her as she slid down the seat. No, stay with me. Look at me." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The remaining attackers, realizing their window of opportunity was closing and their numbers were dwindling, scrambled back into the remaining van and sped off into the night. The silence that fell over the wreckage was heavier than the gunfire. "Chloe." Luca pleaded, his hands covered in her blood, as he pressed his jacket against the wound on her shoulder. His hands, which had ended lives without a tremor, were shaking violently. "Stay awake, damn it." "Leo," Chloe whispered, her vision swimming with dark spots. "I'm here, Chloe," Leo sobbed, grabbing her uninjured hand. "Don't go to sleep. Please don't go." Luca looked at the woman bleeding out in his arms. She had taken a bullet for him. A civilian, an innocent girl who had only wanted to pay her sister's medical bills, had thrown herself into the line of fire to save a Mafia boss. As Giovanni pulled the door open, demanding they move to the extraction vehicle, Luca scooped Chloe into his arms, carrying her through the pouring rain like she was made of fragile glass. "If she dies," Luca vowed to Giovanni, his voice a demonic rasp over the sound of the rain, "I will not just kill Victor Carmichael, I will eradicate his entire bloodline from the face of the earth." But as they sped toward an underground syndicate clinic, Chloe's feverish mind drifted. She thought she heard Luca whispering in her ear, his voice breaking. She thought she heard him confess something impossible. "Hold on, Chloe. I can't lose you. Not like I lost her. Not when I finally know the truth about how Isabella died." Chloe's eyes fluttered shut, the darkness consuming her as the ghost of Leo's mother finally stepped out of the shadows. Consciousness returned, not in a gentle wave, but in a jagged, burning spike of agony radiating from her left shoulder. Chloe gasped, her eyes flying open, to stark, blinding fluorescent lights. The sterile scent of antiseptic and metallic tang of blood filled her nostrils. She tried to move, but a heavy, warm weight pinned her right hand to the edge of the narrow mattress. Turning her head, fighting the nausea swirling in her stomach, she saw him. Luca Moretti, the feared apex predator of the New York syndicate, was slumped in a plastic chair drawn flush against her hospital bed. His custom Italian suit jacket was gone, his dress shirt ruined by dark, drying swathes of her blood. His head rested near her hip, his large, scarred hand enveloping hers in a grip of absolute desperation. He was asleep, but his face was drawn tight with nightmares, the shadows beneath his eyes speaking of a man who had stared into the abyss and almost fallen in. Tucked into the crook of Luca's other arm, fast asleep on the edge of the bed, was Leo. The little boy's face was tear-stained, his tiny fingers locked into the fabric of Chloe's hospital gown. Chloe let out a shaky breath, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet hum of the underground clinic. Immediately, Luca's eyes snapped open. There was a fraction of a second where the lethal syndicate boss surveyed the room for threats before his dark, storm-grey eyes locked onto hers. Chloe. He breathed the single word, carrying the weight of a dying man finding salvation. He sat up straight, his hands hovering over her, as if terrified she would shatter if he touched her. Don't try to sit up. The bullet passed clean through the deltoid, missing the artery by millimeters. Doctor, Rossi said you lost a massive amount of blood, but the muscle damage is repairable. Leo? Chloe rasped her throat, feeling like sandpaper. He's unharmed, Luca assured her softly, brushing a stray curl from the sleeping boy's forehead. He refused to leave your side. Giovanni had to physically barricade the door to keep the nurses from moving him to a pediatric room. He screamed until they let him stay with you. Chloe let her head fall back against the pillows, tears of pure relief stinging her eyes. We made it. You took a bullet meant for my spine, Luca said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, vibrating frequency. The raw emotion in his eyes was staggering, a chaotic storm of guilt, awe, and a fierce, undeniable devotion. In my entire life, no one has ever willingly stepped into the line of fire for me. Men do it for a paycheck. They do it out of fear. But you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. I wasn't thinking about gaining anything, Chloe whispered, her gaze holding his. I was thinking about Leo. He couldn't lose you. Not after everything. Luca flinched, a visceral reaction that seemed to age him 10 years in a single second. He pulled away slightly, running a shaking hand over his jaw. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating, save for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. When you were fading in the car, Luca began, his voice barely a rasp. I told you I couldn't lose you, like I lost her, like I lost Isabella. Chloe swallowed hard. You don't have to explain, Luca. I know the grief. It wasn't grief, Chloe. Luca interrupted his tone, suddenly turning as cold and sharp as cracked ice. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his gaze dropping to the linoleum floor. It was rage and shame. Chloe remained perfectly still, sensing the massive, impenetrable walls around the Mafia boss beginning to fracture. Everyone believes my wife was assassinated in a crossfire by a rival cartel from Chicago. Luca said the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. That is the lie I fed the syndicate. That is the lie I fed the press to protect my family's remaining shred of honor. But it is not the truth. He looked up at her, and the absolute desolation in his eyes stole the breath from Chloe's lungs. Isabella wasn't murdered, Chloe. She betrayed me. She betrayed us. Luca gestured to the sleeping boy beside him. She was having a long-term affair with Lorenzo, my second in command. They spent 8 months, siphoning millions from the family's offshore accounts through a shell corporation registered at a private wealth management firm in Geneva. They were planning to run. Chloe's heart pounded against her ribs. "She was leaving you. She was leaving Leo." Luca corrected the agony in his voice, cracking his stoic facade. "I caught them the night she died. I came home early from a meeting at the Plaza Hotel. I found her in the nursery. She wasn't packing Leo's things. She was kissing him goodbye while Lorenzo waited by the helipad." Tears spilled down Chloe's cheeks as the pieces of Leo's shattered psyche finally snapped into a horrifyingly clear picture. I confronted them in the hallway outside the nursery. Luca continued, his hands balling into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. Lorenzo drew his weapon. We exchanged fire. I killed him. But Isabella, she grabbed the gun from Lorenzo's dead hand. She aimed it at me. And in the chaos, the gun discharged. Luca closed his eyes, a single tear escaping the corner to cut a path through the dried blood on his cheek. She shot herself, Chloe. A ricochet from a panicked trigger pull. She bled out on the floor of our home, wearing her diamonds packed to leave her own flesh and blood behind. "Oh, Luca." Chloe breathed, her heart breaking for the terrifying man sitting before her. "Leo saw it all," Luca whispered. "He walked out of the nursery. He saw his mother holding a gun, he saw her fall, and he knew, with whatever terrifying intuition children possess, that she had been trying to leave him. That is why he stopped speaking. That is why he stopped eating. He wasn't just traumatized by the violence. He was utterly destroyed by the abandonment. The revelation hung in the sterile air, a heavy, suffocating truth that finally explained the boy's absolute terror of women who resembled his mother and his desperate, clinging attachment to Chloe, the only woman who had ever stayed. Luca reached out gently, wrapping his fingers around Chloe's uninjured arm. "When Vanessa framed you, when I told you to pack your things, my son watched the only mother he has ever truly known being ripped away from him again. And yet, he found his voice to save you. Because you are the only pure thing in our damned world. I'm not going anywhere." "Luca," Chloe promised fiercely, ignoring the burning pain in her shoulder as she leaned into his touch. "I am right here." Luca's gaze dropped to her lips, the physical distance between them evaporating. He leaned in the scent of expensive cologne and gunpowder washing over her. But before their lips could meet, the heavy steel door of the clinic room burst open. Giovanni stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, his face drained of all color. He held a secure satellite phone in his hand. "Boss," Giovanni gasped, ignoring all protocol. "It's Memorial Sloan Kettering. Dr. Caldwell just called the emergency line." Chloe's blood turned to ice. "Lily? What happened to Lily?" Giovanni looked at Luca, his eyes conveying a terror he usually reserved for war. Victor Carmichael bypassed the hospital's security, using a private tactical team, disguised as federal agents. They took her, boss. They took Lily. The monitors attached to Chloe began to shriek as her heart rate skyrocketed. Luca stood up slowly, the vulnerable, grieving father, disappearing entirely instantly, replaced by the terrifying, merciless god of the underworld. "Where?" Luca demanded, his voice echoing off the concrete walls like a death knell. "A derelict Carmichael shipping yard in Staten Island," Giovanni reported grimly. "Victor left a message. He wants you alone, unarmed, or the girl doesn't see tomorrow." Chloe ripped the IV from her arm, ignoring the blood that began to flow and the blinding pain in her shoulder. "I'm going with you." "Like hell you are," Luca snarled, turning back to her. "You are bleeding out. You are staying here behind reinforced steel." "She is my sister," Chloe screamed, throwing her legs over the edge of the bed. "This is happening because of me, Because Vanessa hates me. If you leave me here, I will walk barefoot through the city to get to her. Do not shut me out, Luca. I am part of this family now." Luca stared at the fierce, trembling woman before him. She was pale, wounded, and physically outmatched in every conceivable way. Yet she possessed a courage that dwarfed the toughest capos in his syndicate. He didn't argue. He reached into his waistband, pulled out a compact silver Beretta, and racked the slide. "Giovanni!" Luca barked, tossing his jacket aside and grabbing a tactical vest from the medical supply closet. "Mobilize the entire eastern flank. I want snipers on every crane in that shipyard. If Victor Carmichael wants a war, I am going to bring him the apocalypse." The rain had intensified into a torrential downpour, turning the derelict Staten Island shipping yard into a sprawling, muddy graveyard of rusted metal and towering cargo containers. The air smelled of salt diesel and impending death. Luca's armored SUV tore through the rusted chain-link gates, slamming to a halt in the center of a clearing, illuminated by the harsh, blinding floodlights of a dozen idling Carmichael vehicles. Surrounding the clearing were heavily armed mercenaries, their weapons trained directly on the SUV. Chloe sat in the passenger seat, her left arm tightly bound in a sling, her right hand clutching the compact Beretta Luca had given her. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her mind was terrifyingly clear. She was fighting for her sister's life. "Stay close to my back," Luca ordered, his voice devoid of all emotion. He was in his element now, a general walking onto a battlefield he intended to bathe in blood. "Do not draw the weapon unless someone is within 3 feet of you." Luca kicked his door open and stepped out into the freezing rain. Chloe followed, flinching at the sheer volume of weapons pointed at them. Standing in the center of the downpour, shielded by a massive black umbrella held by a bodyguard, was Victor Carmichael. Beside him stood Vanessa, her designer trench coat, soaked her blonde hair, plastered to her face. Her makeup was smeared, making her look like a manic, twisted caricature of her former, glamorous self. And there, kneeling in the mud beside Vanessa, a gun pressed firmly to the back of her head, was Lily. The teenager was shivering violently in her hospital gown, tears streaming down her pale face. "Lily!" Chloe screamed, stepping forward, but Luca's heavy arm shot back, pinning her behind him. Ah, the blushing bride-to-be. Victor Carmichael sneered, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the metal containers. "I told you to come alone, Luca. It seems you have a hard time following instructions." "Let the girl go, Victor." Luca stated, his voice a low, commanding boom that cut through the sound of the rain. "This is between you and me. She is a civilian. She is a sick child. Do not cross a line you cannot uncross." Vanessa let out a shrill, hysterical laugh, snatching the gun from the bodyguard and pressing it harder against Lily's temple. "A line? You crossed the line when you humiliated me, Luca. You threw me out for a pathetic, penniless nanny. You ruined my reputation. You ruined your own reputation, Vanessa, the moment you planted stolen diamonds on an innocent woman," Luca replied coldly. He took a deliberate step forward. "Victor, you are an intelligent man. Do you really want to die in the mud tonight over your daughter's bruised ego?" "I want my shipping routes back," Victor barked, his calm veneer cracking. "I want the ports, Luca. Sign over the eastern seaboard logistics, and you can have the girl. Refuse, and Vanessa paints the mud with her brains." Chloe felt a scream lodge in her throat. She gripped the Beretta tighter, her finger resting cautiously outside the trigger guard, just as Luca had shown her in the car. "You think you have leverage, Victor?" Luca asked, a chilling, predatory smile curling the corner of his lips. He slowly reached into the inner pocket of his tactical vest. Every mercenary in the yard raised their weapons, the sound of safeties clicking off, echoing like a drum roll. Slowly, Luca pulled out a slim, waterproof tablet. He tossed it through the rain. It landed with a splash at Victor's expensive leather shoes. "Pick it up," Luca commanded. Victor hesitated, then gestured for a guard to retrieve it. The guard handed the tablet to the magnate. Victor swiped the screen, his eyes scanning the data illuminated in the harsh light. As he read, the color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. What is this?" Victor stammered, his hands shaking. "That is the live feed of your offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands," Luca explained calmly. "While you were busy storming a hospital, my cyber division breached your central servers. I have systematically liquidated every asset you own. Your legitimate businesses, your dark money, your real estate portfolios in Dubai. Everything. You are completely, utterly bankrupt, Victor." Vanessa gasped, looking at her father. "Dad, what is he talking about?" "I am hitting the execute button in exactly 60 seconds. Luca continued, pulling a remote detonator-style switch from his pocket. "The money will be scattered across 10,000 untraceable cryptocurrency wallets. You will be left with nothing but the clothes on your back. However," Luca paused, letting the absolute terror sink into his rival's bones. "If you drop the weapons and walk away right now, I will transfer it all back. You keep your money. You leave New York. You never come near my family again." Luca leveled a stare at Victor that could have frozen a volcano. "You have 30 seconds to decide if you want to be a billionaire or a dead man." Victor Carmichael was a ruthless man, but he was fundamentally a businessman. He looked at the tablet, then at the ring of snipers he now realized were perched atop the cranes, their laser sights painting a constellation of red dots across his chest. He had been outplayed. "Checkmate." "Drop the gun, Vanessa." Victor croaked, his voice hollow. "What?" "No." Vanessa shrieked, totally unhinged. "He humiliated us. I want her dead." She pointed the gun wildly toward Chloe, then back down at Lily. "I said drop it!" Victor roared, lunging for his daughter. But Vanessa was panicked. Her finger twitched on the trigger. Bang! The gunshot echoed like a cannon blast. But it didn't come from Vanessa's weapon. Giovanni had stepped out from the shadows of the containers, his rifle smoking. Vanessa screamed, dropping her gun as she clutched her shattered shoulder, falling into the mud beside her father. Chloe didn't wait for the order. She sprinted through the mud, dropping to her knees and pulling Lily into a fierce, desperate embrace. The teenager collapsed into her sister's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "I've got you," Chloe cried, pressing her face into Lily's wet hair. "I've got you, it's over." Luca walked slowly across the clearing. The mercenaries, seeing their boss defeated and their paychecks secured, lowered their weapons and stepped back. Luca stood over Victor, who was desperately trying to stop the bleeding from his screaming daughter's shoulder. "You have 24 hours to leave the country," Luca told the broken man. "If I see your face on this continent again, I will not be as merciful as my security chief." Luca turned his back on the Carmichaels, walking over to where Chloe was rocking her sister in the mud. He knelt down, wrapping his massive arms around both of them, shielding them from the relentless rain. In that chaotic, blood-soaked shipping yard, Luca Moretti finally found the one thing his billions had never been able to buy: peace. 6 months later, the sun shone brightly over the manicured lawns of the upstate estate. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere of the fortress was gone, replaced by the sounds of genuine laughter. Chloe sat on a picnic blanket under a massive oak tree, watching as a perfectly healthy Lily chased a giggling Leo across the grass. Leo was babbling excitedly, his voice a constant, beautiful melody that had completely transformed the property. Footsteps approached from behind. Luca sat down next to Chloe, his demeanor relaxed, the harsh lines of his face softened by a genuine, easy smile. He was no longer the syndicate boss. He had spent the last 6 months aggressively restructuring his empire into legitimate shipping and logistics, leaving the blood and violence in the past. They have boundless energy, Luca mused, wrapping an arm around Chloe's waist and pulling her close. They are making up for lost time. Chloe smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. Luca shifted, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside rested a breathtaking, understated diamond ring, a stark contrast to the gaudy stolen jewels of the past. I promised you I would burn the world down to protect you, Luca said softly, his grey eyes locked onto hers with infinite tenderness. But I would much rather build a new one with you. Marry me, Chloe. Let me officially make you the queen of this family. Chloe looked from the ring to the man who had torn his soul apart to keep her safe, and then to the little boy who had brought them all together. Yes, she whispered, sealing the promise with a kiss. Bloodstains wash out, but love leaves a permanent mark. If you were captivated by Chloe's desperate fight for her sister, Leo's touching recovery, and Luca's ruthless dedication to his new family, you won't want to miss our next story. Hit that like button. If you loved the dramatic twist, share this with your fellow romance and drama lovers, and absolutely smash that subscribe button for more thrilling high-stakes Mafia romance tales every single week. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite moment from the Moretti Estate showdown. Stay safe, stay romantic, and we'll see you in the next video.